Let it know you're gonna bring Achdus and introduce it to your Ruchniut. The first level of is Spoidedus. Say hello to your Gashmiut. Let it know you're gonna bring Achdus and introduce it to your Ruchniut. Oh Hashem, I wanna talk to you. I wanna get close to you. Oh Hashem, I wanna talk to you. I wanna get close to you. Even if you think that you're really far, but just remember who you really are. You are a piece of Hashem, and He wants you to talk to Him. If you think that you're really far, just remember who you really are. You are a piece of Hashem, and He wants you to talk to Him. Oh Hashem, I just want to talk to you. I want to get close to you. Oh Hashem, I want to talk to you. I want to get close to you. Every now and then speak to Him in your own words. Learn this from the beautiful birds. Watch them tweet, get out of your seat, and go to the woods and talk to the Lord. Every now and then speak to Him in your own words.
Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful song by Moshe Storch. Oh Hashem, I want to get close to you. I want to talk to you. Moshe developed that song a few years ago. It came to him one morning while he was hiking not far away from here. And then he came in and we were doing a show together that day in our backyard. And so he taught me that song while we were broadcasting live. And that's when the song really came in, when the words came to him. It like actually happened live on AT. He just released that on his own page today, and we're going to be releasing it on our page in a few days. How are you, my holy brothers and sisters? It's great to be with you. Let's light up the darkness. Whoa, it's a new candle. Let's get that guy going. All right. Who's with us today? Melissa Iteljurin says good evening from Great Neck, New York. Stephen Giger says shalom from Dover, New Hampshire. Adrian Smith from Columbia Falls, Montana says shalom. Brandon Christian Sullivan, shalom from Knoxville, Tennessee. John Shore says ready to learn with my yids. Bill Eldridge says shalom from Amtrak, Texas Eagle, somewhere south of St. Louis. You are on the road and learning. I love it. Guy Thomas Kennedy with us from Dayton, Ohio. Arnold Albin is in the house from Northridge, California. Love the music on a beautiful hike as we learn Torah together. Thank you. Pam Pelt says, what's the song again? It's called Oh Hashem. I'm going to put, what I do is always for the music that I play during the countdown timer at the beginning. After the show is over, I add topics covered that I did. You know, just at the end of each class, I add in the description the topics that I've covered and the name and artist of the opening song. So in a little while after we're done, you can find that on the page. What's going on over here? Martin Wade is in the house from South Louisiana. Leslie Ann Landsberg says, nice to see you again. It's great to see you, Hannah Leslie. And Michael Schuster is with us from Melbourne, Australia, broadcasting to the other side of the globe. Gwen Strong is with us from Southwest Michigan. Marjorie Heller is with us from Georgia, happily live rather than doing the replay. Yesterday got me thinking about Rebbitzin Greenbaum when I was little. Neil is with us from Virginia. Deborah Hazelwood from Florida. Debbie Schweigart says shalom from Barnegat, New Jersey, where we just got our power back this morning. And Marasia Janut is with us from Atlanta. Welcome, everybody. Okay, we've got a really beautiful, beautiful daf today. a whole bunch of wisdom teachings, actually almost no halacha, no law, which is always a little unfortunate, but it's beautiful. We're going to be getting some wisdom of the sages with respect to aging and dying. That's what we're going to be talking about today, which can be sad, scary, but also uplifting. Okay, so where are we? We're holding on Shabbos, Tractate Shabbos, the second volume of the Talmud. We're on page 152. That's Daf Kuf Nun Beis. We're in chapter 23, and we're continuing our discussion of Mishnah number 6. This chapter 23 generally is relating to practices that are prohibited on Shabbos because they're very similar to, or actually are, business dealings. And we don't get involved in business, commerce of any kind on Shabbos. Even if all we're doing is talking about it, it's going to bring us down and sort of violate the sanctity of Shabbos, so we don't do it. That's the general flow of this chapter. This Mishnah number 6 was quite specific. It said that on Shabbos, we do not close the eyes of the dead. Once a person has died, their corpse, with regards to the laws of Shabbos, is muktzah. So we don't touch the corpse, although if it's sitting out in the sun, for the sake of the dignity of the one who died, we're going to find a way, but we're going to be very careful how we do it, to get that corpse out of the sun. But in terms of closing the eyes, we don't do that on Shabbos. And the sages say in that same Mishnah that during the week, so not on Shabbos, if a person dies or a person is about to die, we do not close their eyes at all until we're sure that the soul has left the body, that the person has actually died. Only then would we close the eyes of the corpse. It's a kindness to the corpse to close its eyes, but to do so even one moment before the person has really died, before the soul has left the body, is just considered like shortening the life, and we do not do that. Okay. That's where we generally are. So now that we've been talking about death and dying from this teaching about closing the eyes of the corpse, we're going to be continuing. The sages have been interpreting some verses from the book of Kohelet, that's Ecclesiastes, and sort of showing what each verse means in terms of the life cycle and getting old. We don't have to get into those verses. If you're curious about how the sages read into the book of Ecclesiastes, that there are certain sort of poetic verses that are really talking about aging, you can find it in today's daf. We're going to go on and get into a little bit of the poetry, but not so much from Ecclesiastes. So let me get the page in front of me. I'm going to be reading quite a bit today from the text itself. So the Gemara relates that a Roman emperor, and this comes up quite a bit in the Talmud, that a Roman emperor has a conversation with one of the sages. Some might be tempted to say, oh, the sages are being hyperbolic. I mean, how often were they really getting an audience with the emperor of Rome, which is pretty far away from the Holy Land and even farther from Bavel if somebody's going from there. But the fact is, the sages were, just extremely prominent individuals, and there was a respect in Rome for learning. We know that. It's the Roman tradition. And so the idea that these men, these sages of wisdom had something to say, it's not so crazy to think that they had some of these conversations, if not all of them. I was also going to say, the Roman Empire was vast, and they certainly had, politically to deal with all these different lands and all these peoples that were subjugated. Certainly from the point of view of the sages and of the Jews in the Holy Land, we think we're the most important thing. Does the seat of Rome, of the Roman Empire, Rome itself, look out into those vast holdings and think, well, I'm going to pay special attention to what's going on in that tiny country of Judea? And one might think, well, maybe not. But actually, just like today, like Israel is in the news way out of proportion to the size of that country and the conflict that's going on there. Even when there's a conflict there, relative to the conflicts in the world, it's a very small conflict, very few people involved. And yet, for some reason, the eyes of the world are on the state of Israel even today. and it was true then too. Somehow, the Israel has always had this outsized importance in terms of just getting into conversation and being in the news and being something that people are curious about. Because everyone has always known, they just sense that the Holy Land is special. Something's going on there worth paying attention to. At any rate, the Roman emperor has a conversation with Rabbi Yehoshua ben Hananiah. And the emperor says, what is the reason that you did not come to the house of Avidan? Now, we encountered Avidan earlier, and this was a place, it was kind of like an interfaith conversations place. Many of the sages would stay away from it because there were conversations. It was meant to be a gathering of philosophers. But because it was a gathering of philosophers, there were quite a few heretics there, Jewish heretics and people from other cultures that were discussing and teaching things which are very heretical and even, what's the word I'm looking for? Insulting to God, right? It would be besmirching God's honor. And that's why some of the sages would just refuse to go there. And probably Rabbi Yehoshua ben Hananiah was one of those sages. But he's not going to say to the emperor, yeah, because I don't really want to participate in these conversations where you're talking about pagan practices that are idolatrous and sinful in my eyes. So instead, he answers somewhat poetically. He's basically going to make the excuse that I'm too old to get around and it was just too difficult for me to get to that place. But the way he puts it is interesting. He says, Rabbi Yehoshua ben Hananiah said to him enigmatically, the snowy mountain is surrounded with ice, meaning that his hair had turned white. His dogs do not bark, meaning that his voice could no longer be heard. His grinders have ceased grinding. And these are lines from Ecclesiastes that he's using to show that it's referring to himself and that he's too old to get out and about very much. Meaning that his teeth had fallen out. And in the school of Rav, they say that he added, and I am searching for that which I have not lost, because an old man walks bent over and appears to be searching for something. We have a famous line here that comes from Rav Dimi. Rav Dimi came from Eretz Yisrael to Babylonia, so he was one of those sages that traveled from the Holy Land to the east, where the Jewish community was in Bavel, in Babylonia. And he's credited with saying, youth is a crown of roses, old age is a crown of thorns. Now, as we get older, there's a lot of reasons to complain about old age. The body breaks down. Sometimes, God forbid, the mind breaks down. We don't have the strength, the endurance, the ability to deal with things that we had when we were young. Also, the older people get, the more they see their friends leave this world, right? The older you get, the more you experience the deaths of others. So obviously, there's a lot of challenges to growing old. When he says that youth is a crown of roses, I really hear him saying, the modern version of that is youth is wasted on the young, right? The young don't realize that they're wearing a crown of roses until it becomes a crown of thorns, and they look back and think of all the time and opportunity that they wasted. Then we come to a kind of rude exchange. It's a conversation between old and poor Rabbi Yehoshua ben Korcha. So he's a great sage, but he never really, prioritized having wealth, and he just didn't care, He didn't care that he doesn't have the trappings of wealth, that his clothing gets old and tattered, that he doesn't even have shoes at times. And he runs into an apostate eunuch. So a eunuch was a castrated man. Usually that would happen because he was a slave who was entrusted to watch over the harem of some rich person. Right? Usually this is like, if it's a Jew, then it's like he was became enslaved to the non-Jews, was castrated, and now maybe he's back, or he's still a slave of his master. But tragically, so this eunuch, this poor man, has suffered so much. But even though he suffered at the hands of his captor, he comes to assume their philosophies of life. In other words, he turns his back on Judaism. He turns his back on God. And now that he might be a slave, but he's a slave of a rich master. He's trusted because he's been castrated. And so he actually now takes it upon himself to lord it over and even insult this poor and tattered sage who he meets in the road. And so we had this conversation. The apostate eunuch saw that Rabbi Yehoshua ben Korcha was not wearing shoes. And he said to him, "One who rides on a horse is a king. One who rides on a donkey is a free man. And one who wears shoes is at least a human being. But one who does neither this nor that," meaning you have no shoes on, "well, that's like someone who is buried in the earth is better than that one. Somebody who's so poor he doesn't have shoes, you might as well be dead," says the apostate eunuch. So Rabbi Yehoshua ben Korcha said to him, "Eunuch, you said to me 3 things, and now hear 3 things." And I cut off the first part of the story where he said a couple more insults to Rabbi Yehoshua. But now Rabbi Yehoshua answers him. He says, "The glory of a face is the beard, the joy of the heart is a wife, and the portion of the Lord is children. Blessed is the omnipresent who has denied you all of them." Because he's been castrated, he loses testosterone, and he doesn't have a beard. Obviously, he can't have kids, and he doesn't have a wife. So the Lord has denied all of these to you. Now, why would, is Rabbi Yehoshua just being mean to somebody who's had a terrible misfortune in life that he ended up castrated? No, he's upholding the honor of the sages whom this man has now disparaged by disparaging him. I think Rabbi Yehoshua would have been only compassionate to this man, but how often do we see in life that when we undergo our own misfortune, we lose compassion for others, right? And it's really a struggle, right? Dr. Laura talks about this all the time. Bad childhood or bad fortune in your life doesn't entitle you to be mean to other people. And that's why Rabbi Yehoshua is trying to rebuke this man. And so he rebukes him. Then the next story, the Gemara again addresses old age, and now we have Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, so Rabbi. This is the head of the Sanhedrin and the man responsible for setting down in writing the Mishna. And he said to Rabbi Shimon ben Chalafta, "For what reason did we not greet you during the festival the way that my fathers greeted your fathers?" Now, this was a polite way of asking Rabbi Shimon ben Chalafta why he had not come to visit Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi. In other words, it's during the festival. So during the festival, people will gather. This is post-temple period, so it's not that it's happening in Jerusalem, let's say during Passover. But whether, I'm not sure where Rabbi was based. I don't think they were in Yavne anymore, but he's probably one of the northern cities in Caesarea or Tzipori. And people would come into the town to be with the sages and to learn with them. And this Rabbi Shimon ben Chalafta came to town, but he probably just, visited his family, and he didn't come to see Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi. So Rabbi is asking him, "Why didn't you come visit me?" And he said, so Rabbi Shimon ben Chalafta says to him, "Because I have grown old, and the rocks on the road have become tall, and the destinations that are near have become far away, and my 2 feet have been made into 3 with the addition of a cane, and that which brings peace to the house, namely the sexual drive which motivates a couple to make peace, is no more." Now that's kind of interesting, because I think, we often associate the sexual drive, especially when it gets out of control, with something that causes passion and friction and people to fight and argue. But here, Rabbi Shimon ben Chalafta is saying, this is one of the beautiful qualities of the sexual drive, because couples, long for each other. So if they've been in a fight and they were arguing and they can't stand each other and won't talk to each other, eventually that physical longing is going to bring them back together, and it will be a source of peace. It's interesting that, we just had that little story about the eunuch and Rabbi, what was his name, Elazar ben Korcha? And Rabbi Yehoshua ben Korcha. And I did a little research. We think of eunuchs as something that, well, thank God that doesn't exist anymore. It's just, thousands of years ago when people were slaves and watching over harems, that was a eunuch, but that doesn't happen anymore. And what I read was that actually today there are more castrated men alive than in any other time in history. Why? Because sometimes it's part of a medical procedure to treat prostate cancer, that the man's testes are removed. And sometimes when people have an out of control libido that is ruining their life because they become addicted to pornography and other kinds of thrill-seeking behavior, they choose to undergo that procedure to bring down that testosterone level and to calm them down. I was not aware of that. But it's interesting in light of what Rav Shimon ben Chalafta is saying, that the drive, it's very strong. It's not a surprise. The physical longing for the other sex or for your partner, sexual partner, is so strong that if it's harnessed properly, it's a source of peace. But if it's not exploited, if it's today's terrible with my vocabulary, but if it's abused, right? If it's abused and just becomes a source of pleasure seeking and thrill seeking, my God, it can just take a person so far off the rails and devastate not only his life, but the life of his loved ones. Let's continue. Rabbi Yishmael ben Yosef, Rabbi Yishmael, the son of Rabbi Yosef, says, as Torah scholars grow older, wisdom is increased in them. Now, this is an answer to some of these other lines from Ecclesiastes that are being interpreted, that people, as they get older, they lose their memory and they lose their power of reasoning, and thus they lose their wisdom. Rabbi Yishmael, the son of Rabbi Yosef, is saying, but as Torah scholars grow older, their wisdom is increased in them. And he gives a source, as it is stated, with aged men is wisdom, and length of days brings understanding. That's from the book of Job, 12:12. But, says Rabbi Yishmael, and as ignoramuses grow older, foolishness is increased in them. As it is stated, he removes the speech of men of trust and takes away the understanding of the aged. So the two verses would seem to contradict each other. And Rabbi Yishmael resolves that contradiction by saying, if you're pursuing wisdom during your life, then as you get older, you're going to be able to concretize. You may forget words that you're looking for from time to time. You may not have all of Scripture memorized the way these fellas often did, but you'll be able to see the connections between things. And in that, you have a real chance of adding to the wisdom of your community and of the world at a very advanced age. But if what you pursue during your life is just pleasure and foolishness, or even just working hard, but not trying to grow and develop yourself and refine your character, then you're not going to be accustomed to seeking wisdom when you get to your old age, and you'll pay a price at that time. Let's go on. Rabbi Yitzhak on the many levels of Olam Haba. Now, this is beautiful. This is something I've talked about many times in my teaching on my show, that according to Judaism, to Jewish mysticism, when we leave this world, it's not a binary outcome that we either go to heaven or hell. That is not the Jewish understanding of the world to come at all. In fact, there's an infinite number of places where you can end up in the next world, and there your journey continues. And it's almost like where you go when you leave this life is your starting point, and then you move from there. You can grow and grow and grow and keep growing in wisdom. But there is a reward for the way you live your life here, and that becomes your entry point over there. And so here, so Rabbi Yitzhak said, so he's commenting on the line, for a person goes to his eternal home. That's Ecclesiastes 12:5. So Rabbi Yitzhak says, this teaches that each and every righteous person is given a dwelling place in the world to come, in accordance with his honor. And the Gemara offers a parable in which a king enters a city along with his servants. When they enter, they all go through a single gate. However, when they sleep, each one is given a dwelling place in accordance with his honor. So too, although everyone dies, not everyone receives the same reward in the world to come. Continuing. Okay, so Rabbi Yitzhak, now that we're hearing about Rabbi Yitzhak, he comments and brings down a source for it that when a person dies, and we saw this when we were back in Tractate Brachas and the sages were talking about it, the question is, when a soul leaves this world, does it remain connected to the vessel that housed it while he walked around in this world? In other words, when a person dies, when a soul dies, does he feel pain when the corpse starts to decompose? Rabbi Yitzhak says yes, that the soul feels pain as the maggots begin to eat into the flesh of the corpse. Rav Chisda sort of limits this and says, yeah, he does mourn that, he was attached to the body, right? The soul right after death, and this is why people have these experiences, these shared death experiences, near-death experiences. When a person dies, they don't just shoot out of this world and go up to the world of souls and, it's over and done with. The soul lingers here. It still has that connection to the body. How long does that connection last? We're going to get different conflicting accounts of this, but Rav Chisda says that the soul mourns for the body, for the death of the body, for 7 days. In other words, the soul is present during the Shiva, right? The soul is around when we go to comfort the mourners during those 7 days after the death. The soul is at the Shiva house also. The soul is one of the mourners who is present there. Rav Yehuda teaches that one who has no mourners, if a person dies and there's no one to mourn that poor person, he was alone, he was separated from his loved ones, his community, and so he dies in a place where no one knows him and there's no one to mourn for him. So then it is proper, and it is what we should do, to make a shiva for him anyway, that we should have 10 men come together. They should pray and say Kaddish, say the prayer for the dead, for this person, and even receive visitors to comfort them, even though they didn't know this person, but they're acting as his mourners, and it's an honor. It honors the deceased, that people are sitting for him as if they were his family, his loved ones, and that they were mourners for him. And I'm reminded, for those of you who've been with us for a while, you might remember the story, I've written it up, of Eddie Dinkowitz. This happened some years ago, and I got a call that a member of the community had died, and as a member of the synagogue community, but no one knew him because tragically he was somebody who was developmentally disabled, and he had been institutionalized as a fairly young man, I think as a teenager, and had lived out his whole life in an institution. And by the time he lived a pretty long life. He got to be, I think, in his 60s, I think not 70s, but I think he lived to his 60s. His parents were gone. No one, I don't think he had siblings, and maybe they were gone. And, there were the caretakers in the institution, and they're the ones who notified the synagogue, because apparently it had been on his record, when he was first admitted, 40 years before. So they made an announcement. If people would like to go to the cemetery so that there's a minyan there to say Kaddish for this poor soul, it would be a kindness. So I went, and I posted about it here on Accidental Talmudist, and the cemetery had like a digital sign-in book where people could leave a message to the departed, and so I posted a link to that, and we didn't have 1 million followers at that time, but I think we had over 100,000, and it touched something in the community, and hundreds of people wrote messages into the cemetery's logbook for Eddie, saying, I wish I'd known you, I wish I could have been with you, and that you hadn't lived this lonely existence. We care about you. We're praying for you. We're going to do good deeds in your honor here in this world so that it can help your soul in the next world. And the cemetery staff said they had never, ever seen such an outpouring. I mean, literally hundreds and hundreds of comments coming in at the cemetery logbook. And I mean, it was touching. You know, it's sad that Eddie didn't have that kind of an outpouring of love during his life, but at least it happened to him right after his death. And Nina and I, you know, after this kind of long and, you know, sort of strange day, very emotional day, we were retiring that night. And I said, you know, I wonder if Eddie knows that all this happened. And Nina said, of course he does. And I said, well, Eddie, if it's possible, if it's not asking too much, give us a sign. We went to bed. At 2 a.m. that night, our alarm, our home alarm, which was not activated, it was not turned on, suddenly started shrieking like super loud, like we, you know, like jumped out of bed. It was so shocking. And there was just no explanation for why. And Nina just posted the story, The Extraordinary Death of Eddie Dinkowitz. It's there in the comments. And I mean, it was so shocking and it was totally inexplicable. Our alarm never did anything like that in the many years we had it before, and never did anything like that in the years since. And, you know, if you do a little research, you'll see that very often sort of phenomena involving the recently departed involves, you know, energy. In other words, like electrical energy, appliances, you know, appliances turn on and off, lights turn on and off. There was a story my cousin told me about when my grandmother in Israel died, that her bed suddenly started, the medical bed started rising in the middle of the night when her beloved grandson came in the room. You know, there's so many crazy stories like that involving electrical phenomenon. And what can I tell you? We were, I mean, just as sure can be that Eddie had sent us a message. And if you were part of that, our community back then, and sent one of those messages to Eddie, you know, thank you, shkoyach. Maybe you be strengthened to do such good deeds again in the future. And, you know, if we see an opportunity to be there, to form community for people when they're alive, so that this shouldn't happen like with Eddie, that they arrive at their death and no one even knows, let's take that opportunity. All right, let's continue. So that was Rav Yehuda's teaching, that if one has no mourners, we create a mourning community for him. Okay, so then the sages will argue a little bit, you know, how long is the deceased fully present, not just like a trace of the deceased, but like, you know, the soul is right there. Some say, you know, until the body is buried, and some say until the body decomposes. So certainly that's why the mourning period during which the children, for example, of a parent who dies will say Kaddish lasts 11 months, right? And so it's 11 months that we can be of a comfort to the deceased. Now, one who takes care of his body, so now let's focus a little bit on the living. One who takes care of his body during his life is likened by our sages to the wise subject of a king. A king entrusts his people with beautiful garments. The ones who are wise will take care of the garments, and they won't wear them when they're going to go do, you know, labor digging ditches and stuff, and they won't wear them when they're playing baseball and sliding into third in the dirt and things like that. But they're going to wear those garments when they go to, you know, places that are refined and elevated. And the people who are foolish will wear the fine garments lent to them by the king wherever they go, or whatever filth they're walking around in. And of course, after some time passes, their garments, those beautiful garments, will be all tattered. The wise people will have kept them nice and clean and beautiful. And when the king summons them all back, as he surely will, to the wise ones, he'll say, thank you for taking care of the garments. I appreciate that you did that. And to the foolish ones, he says, what were you thinking? Now, what is the garment? It's our bodies, right? The body is the garment of the soul. our words, our deeds, our thoughts, speech, deeds, physicality, these are all garments of the soul. So in terms of our bodies, it's not like we can take our bodies on and off. So how do we control where those garments are worn? Well, we stay away from the filth and the refuse and the unrefined practices that will hurt the body. As we've talked about before, it is a spiritual practice to take care of the body so that we'll live longer and have the opportunity to do more good in this world. Rabbi Eliezer says, the souls of the righteous are housed beneath the throne of glory. The souls of the wicked are slung back and forth, are thrown. It's almost like you can imagine that by two angels on either side of the world, right? So you can imagine, instead of the usual image that we have, and we have it in Judaism as well, that the souls of the wicked are going to need to be refined or punished. Even there is eternal punishment for a few in the fires, right? In the fires of Gehenna. That's very rare. I mean, a lot of people will end up in Gehenna just temporarily to have their sins refined from them before they can move on to the rest of the world to come, as it were. But in this image, the wicked there's like these two angels who have slingshots, and they position themselves at either end of the universe. And all day long, they sling the souls of the wicked from one end of the universe to the other. What are the sages telling us? That there's no rest for the wicked, right? If people think that there's suffering in this world and that we go to our reward, part of that reward is peace, right? We're going to be learning, we're going to hear music, we're going to be part of that community in the world to come. We won't be stressed, but the wicked will be. The wicked will be very stressed out. They won't have a moment's peace in that next world. Rav Nachman says, well, what about the middling souls? Actually, Rav Nachman answers. Who was it that asked him? Rabbi said to Rav Nachman. So he says, well, you've given us a teaching about the righteous who are housed beneath the throne of glory. So they're in close proximity to the Holy One, blessed be He. And the wicked are being slung from one end of the universe to the other. So what happens to the middling souls? And really that's where most of us are, the middling souls, right? When we're talking about, there's three groups. So the righteous, those are tzaddikim, those are like the saints. And the wicked are like this, they're so despicably wicked that we're not surprised they're going to have eternal suffering. All the rest of us are in that middle group. So what happens to the middle group? And Rav Nachman answers him, well, the middle group, so now this is another image system, the middle group and the wicked are entrusted to the angel Duma. So Duma is in charge of the world of spirits, right? So this is the world of spirits, and they go into the they're under the authority of Duma. But the middling souls, who've got some good deeds to their name, they're going to have peace there. They're going to have an ability to learn and grow and move on in the world to come. But the very wicked souls are not going to get a moment of peace. They're going to be punished and stressed in that world of, under the authority of Duma. The middling ones have rest and the wicked do not. And finally, I'm going to get your comments and questions. I'm just going to read one little story here. The Gemara cites a related story. So the diggers who were digging in Rav Nachman's land came upon a grave. And it was the grave of Rav Achai bar Yoshiya, who was buried there. And he rebuked them, right? They disturbed him, right? So they disturbed his grave. And there's a couple of interpretations of what happened here. Why were these diggers digging? And one interpretation is that the grave had become unmarked and lost, and they were trying to make a farm field there when they encountered the grave. And so they disturbed him. And so Rav Achai was buried there, and he rebuked them. So the diggers came and said to Rav Nachman, a deceased person just rebuked us. So Rav Nachman came and said to the person buried there, who is the master? Meaning, who are you? And the man said to him, I am Achai bar Yoshiya. And Rav Nachman said to him, well, how has your body been preserved? You died a long time ago. Didn't Rav Mari say that the righteous will turn to dust? Rav Achai said to him, and who is Mari, whom I do not know? Why should I be concerned what he says? Here I am, I haven't decomposed, my body is present. So Rav Nachman said to him, well, even without Rav Mari's statement, there is an explicit verse which is written in Scripture from Ecclesiastes, and the dust will return to the earth as it was. Rav Achai said to him, well, whoever taught you the book of Ecclesiastes did not teach you the book of Proverbs. For it is written in Proverbs, a tranquil heart is the life of the flesh, but envy is the rotting of the bones. That's Proverbs 14:30. This means that anyone who has envy in his heart during his lifetime, his bones rot in the grave. And anyone who does not have envy in his heart, his bones do not rot. Isn't that interesting? That envy, it's sort of like the root of so many other sins. And it's the 10th commandment is don't covet, right? So when we seek to have, when we want, when we long for things which are not ours, it's like we're saying, well, God, I know you apportioned the world and made things the way you saw fit, but I think you got it all wrong because I don't have enough. I want. And that thing of just satisfying my own cravings, that is what leads people to behave in ways that they stress themselves during their life and they end up committing sins and abominations just to feed that endless hunger. One cannot come to behave properly in this world until he can manage his cravings. Rav Nachman touched him and saw that he had substance. He wasn't a ghost. He wasn't a spirit. He was substantial. He was physical. Rav Nachman said to him, let the master arise and come into my house. Seeing as, it's like you've been resurrected from the dead, so come over for lunch. And Rav Achai said to him, you have revealed that you have not even studied the prophets. And it is not just the writings of which you are ignorant, for it is written, and you shall know that I am the Lord when I open your graves and lift you up from your graves, my nation. That's from Ezekiel. As long as the dead have not been instructed to leave their graves, leaving of their own accord is prohibited. It's like they have the power to do it, but since they're now living in the world of truth, they obey. And even though they might have a longing to walk around in the world, they wait. And Rav Nachman once again asked Rav Achai about the preservation of the flesh. And he said, but it is written, for you are dust and you shall return to dust. Genesis 3:19. So why has your body not turned into dust? And Rav Achai answered, that verse applies to the righteous in terms, like if you're going to talk about the righteous, the tzaddikim, the saints, right? Because everyone else, their body turns to dust and they go hang out and do what they're going to do. But they're truly righteous. It's like their bodies are preserved. And so about them, is it not true that they return to dust? And here's Rav Achai's answer. He says, that verse applies to the righteous only 1 hour before the resurrection of the dead, so that they too may be created anew. Right? So if we ever worry that, God forbid, somebody's body was destroyed, right? Like in the Holocaust, so many righteous people, martyrs, their bodies were incinerated by the evil empire. So what is it that, what body are they going to have when they're resurrected? Well, obviously God has the power. He gave us bodies in the first place, and he has the power to give them new bodies. And so the righteous, even though they don't decompose according to this teaching, in the same way as the middling ones and the wicked ones, at the end, right before the resurrection, they'll decompose fast so that they can get a brand new garment of flesh to wear in the times of the resurrection. Okay, let's get to your comments and questions. Brandon Christian Sullivan says, Kohelet is one of my favorites. Robert Alter's translation elucidates a great deal of wisdom. Robert Alter's, amazing. Just a beautiful translation of the Bible. And Kohelet, it's one we don't read often enough. We certainly do read it, in shul, sometimes during the year. But that's one that's worth, like you say, just, you have a peaceful Saturday afternoon, pick up Kohelet, pick up Ecclesiastes. On its surface, it seems like very depressing, right? It's like King Solomon saying, well, I had it all. I did it all. And in the end, what did it mean? What did it amount to? But when you read it at a little deeper level and you see that, well, he didn't find the answers because it's not given to us to know the answers to those top questions. But even at the end of his life, he's still seeking. He's still looking for wisdom. And while he can't find those ultimate answers, and he's the wisest person who ever lived, his final conclusion at the end of the book of Ecclesiastes, the end of Kohelet, that's the Hebrew name, he says, so at the end of the day, since we're not going to know the answers to these questions, what are we going to do? We're going to do our best. We're going to obey the laws. We're going to fulfill the commandments. We're going to be there for other people. And that's enough for us. Bill Eldridge, I wonder, though, about crowns of thorns and roses. The roses still have their thorns, but hidden or perhaps made up for by the petals. The thorn crown of old age is denied the compensation of the roses, but it's also more honest. I mean, for sure, for sure. I think that a great blessing for us all would be that we appreciate every stage of the journey. And when we're old, we're able to look back and say, you know what? I really got a lot out of my youth. I made a lot of mistakes, but I also learned a lot of lessons. And I got a lot out of my middle age. I made a lot of mistakes. I learned a lot of lessons. I tried. I dreamed. I worked toward fulfilling my dreams. I fulfilled some, not others. And a person who lives his life that way, I believe, when they get to their old age, will be able to enjoy that stage of life as well. And I think, Bill, you're absolutely right. I mean, when they've got that enhanced vision, they've seen so much, they've seen things come and go, rise and fall. They know the outcomes of things. So there's an honesty that goes with that. And that's why, we look at certain older people who are just so blunt, right? They don't bother. They don't have time for putting on airs and masking things with nonsense. They just tell it like it is. And we're drawn to that. We respect that. Martin Wade. The Roman government was steeped in law, and the Roman civil code forms the basis for most of Western European law. So the sages were consulted many times on the logic of the law. Thank you. Good point, Martin. Jason Lipstein says, my microwave did the same thing once when I was thinking strongly about God. It went on by itself. My sister's car also started on its own in the garage once during my Torah study too. Most people will look at events like this and say, yeah, it's a coincidence. What are you talking about? But the spiritually minded will say, that's an anomaly. That probably happened for a reason. It's a higher reason. What's the message? What is God telling me? What am I to make of this, right? When we receive this kind of messages that are anomalous, that's a time to ask, what you're asking me to do something. You're asking me to take on a new mission, to redirect, my efforts one way or another. It's a time for, it's an important time to reflect on where we are, where we're going, and what we're going to do about it. Sharon Fran Brooks, my dad used to get minyanim together for Jewish war veterans in the veterans home near him when there was no family. Beautiful, beautiful. Such important work. Your father did great. And he obviously taught you good values too, Sharon. Bill Eldridge puts me in mind of a quite famous line, "Oh dear Lord, you made many poor people." I realize, of course, it's no shame to be poor, but it's no great honor either. So what would have been so terrible if I had a small fortune? That's from Fiddler on the Roof, right? Yeah. And what did we learn yesterday? A person should always be praying for their parnasa. We should always be praying for our livelihood, even if we're very comfortable and very well off. First of all, we should be very grateful for what we have, and we should keep praying that it lasts and that it even gets increased. We should be asking for more, because if we're people who tithe properly and set aside from everything we gain, then the more we gain, the more we're going to be able to channel through to the needy. And finally, Bill says, also, I just adore this episode of the deceased sage upbraiding the living one, right? It's great. It's great. These kinds of dialogues are so charming. And I mean, we have to keep it moving here, but what I would like to do when I encounter something like that myself and I have time is, as a dramatist, like really start filling in that conversation, and how the sage has a lot of questions, and how the cantankerous, sage from an earlier age, how he's behaving. I think it might be interesting to see this new movie, The American Pickle. Seth Rogen has gotten himself into some real hot water with his comments on Israel. He is a good actor, and I'm curious to see what this movie's like about a real old world Yid, right? from I think from Poland or something, comes to America in 1919, falls into a vat of pickle juice, is preserved, and wakes up 100 years later. And of course, from another time and place, a Rip Van Winkle type of story, but it's actually based on a Talmudic story. That's where that first comes from, of Honi the circle maker. It's in Tractate Tanis, or in Gittin. I think it's in, I can't remember if it's in Gittin or Tanis. But anyway, he sleeps for 70 years and comes back, and it's to see the world in its future. It has a lot of positives and a lot of negatives. So we'll see what they do with that movie. Should be interesting. All right, my friends, that's what I've got for us today. With God's help, we'll get together tomorrow for page 153. So it's there's 157. The last page of Tractate Shabbos is 157, because all tractates start on page 2. That means there's 156 pages in the tractate. But we'll reach 157 and make a siyum on Tractate Shabbos on Monday. We're going to go an hour later than usual, so it's going to be 7 p.m. Pacific on Monday. And if you're making a siyum with me, so have something nice to drink. Maybe a snack, maybe a little bourbon or a little wine, something, a tea if that's more your pleasure. But we'll make a l'chaim, and we'll make a bracha, and it'll be nice that we come together through the longest tractate in the Talmud, and that's scheduled to happen on Monday evening. That's when we'll make the siyum on Tractate Shabbos. Have a great, great day, my